See why this girl was begging to get out of the locked room, and what the millionaire did. If this story interested you, subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you're watching from. Let's begin. In Star Island, one of Miami's most exclusive neighborhoods, an imposing mansion rose among palm and sea grape trees, its windows adorned with Egyptian linen curtains and its gardens meticulously manicured. Behind that facade of opulence and silence lived Beatrice, a 6-year-old girl, the only daughter of Robert Monroe, a tech sector entrepreneur who had revolutionized the software market in the United States. Beatrice's mother, Adrienne, had departed this world in an accident on the A1A scenic highway 3 years prior, leaving a void that seemed impossible to fill. Just 4 months after the tragic event, Robert surprised everyone by marrying Deborah Vance, a Miami socialite known for her impeccable beauty and constant presence in the city's society columns. Elegant, sophisticated, and involved in charitable projects for underprivileged children, Deborah quickly won the favor of Miami's high society. The new family appeared, in the public eye, as a portrait of resilience and renewal. However, what seemed to be a family's reconstruction was about to capture the attention of someone accustomed to seeing beyond appearances. Frances Riley, a social worker with over 12 years of experience at the Department of Children and Family Services, DCF, in Miami, had developed a sixth sense for situations that escaped the common eye. Her work with families in social vulnerability had taught her to read between the lines, to perceive the unsaid, to pick up on almost imperceptible signs that something was not right. On a March afternoon when the Miami heat was tempered by a fine, steady rain, Frances was making a routine visit to the Monroe residence. Child Protective Services had received a school report about Beatrice that, while not indicating anything alarming, contained observations about recent changes in her behavior. It was a standard visit, the kind that usually ended with coffee on the veranda and a positive report. As Deborah, in a white linen dress that contrasted with her perfect tan, led Frances through the luxurious rooms of the house, something interrupted the formality of the visit. A sound, coming from the second floor, caught the social worker's trained attention, a stifled cry, like someone trying to suffocate their own lament. "What was that?" Frances asked, stopping in the middle of the staircase leading to the upper floor. Deborah adjusted the pearl necklace on her neck and, with a rehearsed smile, replied, "Oh, that's just Beatrice. She's taking a nap. She's been a bit under the weather these days, you know. Children at this age catch all sorts of bugs at school." Frances discreetly checked her watch, 2:20 p.m. It was too early for what should be a natural rest for a healthy child, especially considering the dismissal time of the private school where Beatrice studied, which ended at 3:30 p.m. "I thought she would be at school at this time," she commented casually, carefully observing the stepmother's reaction. "Normally, she would be," Deborah replied without hesitation, guiding her away from the stairs. "But as I said, she wasn't feeling well. The doctor recommended rest for a few days. Come, I want to show you the music room we renovated. The piano belonged to my grandmother, a relic from the 1940s. In the following days, Frances couldn't shake the uneasy feeling the visit had left her with. She began to review the previous reports on the case, signed by a colleague who had recently retired. She found a series of almost perfect evaluations. Child well-nourished or well-dressed, with exemplary school attendance. Deborah was described as a loving and present stepmother, while the residence was classified as a stable and safe environment. But Frances knew reality all too well to believe in perfection. Determined to investigate further, she visited, unannounced, St. Andrew's Preparatory School, one of the most traditional and expensive educational institutions in Miami's affluent South End, where Beatrice was enrolled in the 1st grade. "Ms. Riley, what a pleasant surprise," said Cecilia Montgomery, the headmistress, a woman in her 50s with a serious demeanor and a posture that betrayed years of authority in classrooms. "How can I help you?" "I'm conducting a routine evaluation on a few students," Frances replied, maintaining a professional tone. "I'd like to talk a little about Beatrice Monroe." The headmistress's expression subtly changed. She indicated a chair and closed her office door. "Beatrice?" "Yes, an exceptional student, academically speaking. She has an impressive memory for her age. But, Frances prompted, There's something in her behavior that concerns us. She doesn't interact with the other children. She spends recess alone, always in the same corner of the playground, hugging a worn-out teddy bear we call Tobias. Cecilia hesitated before continuing. At first, we thought it was just shyness, perhaps a natural grieving process for her mother. However, it's been almost 3 years now. Francis made a few notes, trying to keep a neutral expression. Has there been any recent change in her behavior? Yes, Cecilia replied, getting up and going to a file cabinet. In the last few weeks, her teacher, Julianne, found these in her backpack. The headmistress handed Francis a folder containing several drawings made by Beatrice. They were disturbing images for a child of that age. Doors with multiple locks, threatening shadows, and repeatedly, a golden key drawn with impressive precision. And that's not all, Cecilia continued. Beatrice has been absent a lot lately, always with impeccable doctor's notes, of course. But when she's here, there are moments when she seems absent, as if she's physically present but mentally elsewhere. Julianne once found her in the bathroom, talking to herself, asking someone not to lock the door. Francis felt a knot in her stomach. Years of experience told her that something was seriously wrong with that little girl. I'd like to speak with Beatrice, if possible. The headmistress nodded, and minutes later, a small girl with brown hair and large eyes entered the room, accompanied by a teacher. Beatrice wore the impeccable school uniform and carried the worn-out teddy bear. Her eyes quickly scanned the room, as if looking for escape routes, before fixing on the floor. "Hi, Beatrice," Francis smiled, crouching down to be at the girl's level. "My name is Francis. My job is to help children. Can we talk for a little bit?" Beatrice didn't answer, nor did she look up. She just clutched the teddy bear tighter against her chest. "Is this Tobias?" Francis asked, trying to establish a connection. "He's very handsome. May I see him?" The girl hesitated for a long moment before extending the toy, but as she did, it slipped and fell to the floor. As Francis picked it up, she noticed something strange. The bear had an unusual weight in a specific part. While she talked to Beatrice, trying to elicit a response that never came, she discreetly examined the toy and felt something rigid inside, hidden in the seam of its neck. "Is Beatrice always like this?" she asked the teacher after the girl was taken back to her classroom. "Not always," replied Julianne, a young woman with colorful glasses and a worried expression. "She used to be a normal, even talkative child. The change began after her mother's death, but it has intensified over the last year. There are days when she seems afraid of almost everything. The sound of the bell, being alone in the bathroom, even getting into the car that comes to pick her up." Upon leaving the school, Francis took copies of Beatrice's drawings with her, kindly provided by Cecilia. She also carried a growing sense of urgency. In her apartment in Coconut Grove that same evening, she carefully examined the teddy bear she had accidentally placed in her bag. With a small pair of scissors, she delicately opened the seam on the neck and found an object that made her heart race, a small piece of paper folded several times. Unfolding it, she saw written in childish handwriting the words "Dark Room," and, next to them, once again, the drawing of the same golden key. Francis knew she was crossing a line. Taking the bear without permission could jeopardize her entire case, but something told her there was no time to lose. That piece of paper was more than a note. It was a silent cry for help. The next day, she decided to visit the area around the Monroe mansion. It was a quiet street, with enormous houses hidden behind high walls and intimidating security systems. On the corner, she found an elderly man sweeping the sidewalk in front of a smaller, yet still imposing, house. "Good morning," Francis greeted. "Have you lived here long?" Mr. Joseph, as he introduced himself, was a 78-year-old man who had lived there for over 3 decades. After a brief conversation about the neighborhood and the changes over the years, Francis casually mentioned the Monroes. "That family at the end of the street? With the little girl?" Mr. Joseph stopped sweeping, leaning on the broom handle. "Fine people, at least Robert is. I knew his first wife, Adrienne, a simple woman, the kind who treats everyone the same. A shame what happened." He shook his head. "The new wife, well, she's different." "Different how?" Francis asked, trying not to sound too eager. "Look, miss, I don't like to talk about other people's lives. Mr. Joseph seemed uncomfortable. But that house isn't as happy as it looks in People magazine. At night, sometimes, you can hear shouting. The woman shouting at the girl. One time, I saw the little one in the garden, alone, for over 3 hours. It was scorching hot, and no one came out to give her water or check on her. Frances felt a tightness in her chest. Have you ever mentioned this to anyone? I tried once, he replied, lowering his voice even more. I called that anonymous tip line. 2 days later, I got a visit from an expensive lawyer, warning me about the legal consequences of spreading unfounded rumors. How did they know it was me? I can't say. The conversation with Mr. Joseph was just the beginning. In the following days, Frances discreetly investigated the family's history. She discovered that all the staff who had worked in the house since Adrienne's time had been replaced after Deborah's arrival. She managed to get the contact information for Lorena, a former housekeeper who had worked for the Monroes for 8 years. They met in a bakery in South Beach, far from the watchful eyes of Star Island. Lorena, a middle-aged Hispanic woman with eyes that revealed both kindness and weariness, told how she had been dismissed 2 months after Robert's marriage to Deborah. I practically raised Beatrice in her first years. After Mrs. Adrienne passed, the girl would only calm down with me, Lorena recounted, nervously fiddling with the sugar dispenser. But Mrs. Deborah said I spoiled the child too much, that I was creating an unhealthy dependency. The truth is, I think she didn't want anyone around who remembered the old times. What was her relationship with Beatrice like? Frances asked. In front of Mr. Robert, it was all affection. When he traveled, it was a different story, cold, distant. She got irritated by any noise the girl made. Once, she took all the toys Beatrice had left in the living room and threw them in the trash, said it was to teach her to be organized. Lorena hesitated before continuing. Before I left, they started some renovations in the back of the house, an old room that was used for storage. I heard Mrs. Deborah instructing the contractor to soundproof the place and reinforce the door. She said it would be a meditation space. I found it strange at the time, but I didn't imagine... Didn't imagine what? Frances pressed. On my last day, I saw Mrs. Deborah take Beatrice there. The girl was crying, saying she was afraid of the dark. I wasn't supposed to be seeing that, so I pretended I was cleaning the hallway. The last thing I saw was Mrs. Deborah closing the door with a large, ornate golden key, one of those old-fashioned ones, and you know, and telling Beatrice that she would only come out when she learned how to behave. Lorena wiped away a tear. I tried to talk to Mr. Robert before I left, but he was traveling. I left a letter, but I never got a response. I don't think he ever received it. Armed with these accounts and a few more pieces of evidence she managed to collect, Frances sought legal support. Marianne Daniels, a lawyer known for her work in defending children's rights, listened attentively to the case and agreed to help. Together, they prepared a formal complaint to be presented to the public prosecutor's office. However, before they could file the case, Frances received an alarming call from Cecilia, the school's headmistress. Beatrice hasn't been to school in a week, she reported, her voice tense. We called the house, and Deborah says she has severe pneumonia, but she hasn't sent any doctor's note. Yesterday, the driver who usually picks her up came to the school to collect her homework, and when I asked about the girl, he seemed nervous. He said something like, "That house is no place for a child." When I tried to get him to explain, he said he had already said too much and left. The situation was escalating faster than Frances had expected. She needed to act quickly, but she also needed to be cautious. Any false move could put Beatrice at even greater risk. During a sleepless night, mentally reviewing everything she had discovered, Frances had an idea. Robert Monroe was known for his frequent business trips, but he always returned for important company events. And just next week, there would be the launch of a new software that promised to revolutionize the digital security market. The event would be at the Fontainebleau Hotel, and Robert's presence was certain. It was risky, but Frances decided that confronting him directly might be the best chance to help Beatrice. If she could make him see what was happening in his own home, perhaps she could avoid a draining and potentially traumatic process for the girl. On the day of the event, Frances wore her best outfit, a conservative navy blue dress, and managed to gain access to the launch cocktail party, thanks to one of Marianne's contacts in the press. The ballroom was filled with entrepreneurs, journalists, and Miami's high society personalities. Robert, tall and with a commanding presence, circulated among the guests with a confident smile that didn't reach his eyes. By his side, stunning in a red dress, Deborah attracted gazes wherever she went. Frances waited patiently for the right moment. When Robert stepped away from the group to get a drink, she approached him. "Mr. Monroe," she said in a firm voice, "I need to speak with you about Beatrice." Robert looked at her, confused. "And you are?" "Frances Riley, a social worker from the DCF. I visited your home a few weeks ago." His expression hardened. "If this is about that visit, my wife has already explained everything. There's nothing for us to discuss. Beatrice is well cared for." "Mr. Monroe, please," Frances insisted, keeping her voice low so as not to draw attention. "I have reason to believe your daughter is in danger. There's evidence that she is being—" "Enough," Robert cut in, his face suddenly red. "I don't know what you're implying, but I know this kind of tactic. People have tried to extort my family before. Whatever you're planning, it won't work." Deborah approached at that moment, sliding an arm through Robert's. "Is there a problem, dear?" "Nothing important," he replied, casting a warning glance at Frances. "Ms. Riley was just leaving." Frances realized she wouldn't get anywhere there. The protective circle around Robert was solid, and Deborah clearly wielded a powerful influence over him. She would need a different approach. As she left the event, she felt a touch on her shoulder. It was a tall man with a salt-and-pepper beard who introduced himself as Carlos Ramirez, the Monroe family's driver. "I heard what you said to the boss," he said in a low voice, looking around nervously. "And I also heard what the headmistress told you about our conversation. You need to know, the girl isn't sick. She's being punished. It's been days since I've seen her leave that room at the back of the house." "The room with the golden lock?" Frances asked, her heart racing. Carlos nodded, his eyes revealing fear and guilt. "I shouldn't be saying this. I'll lose my job, but I can't sleep right anymore. That child doesn't deserve this. The boss is almost never home. He doesn't see what happens. And when he is, Mrs. Deborah is a different person, Carlos. We need your help," Frances said, feeling she had finally found a crack in the wall of silence surrounding the Monroe mansion. "What can I do?" he asked, still looking around as if afraid of being watched. "Testify. Confirm what you've seen. We need concrete proof to help Beatrice." Carlos hesitated, running a hand through his beard. "It's my word against theirs. Who's going to believe me? They have powerful lawyers." "There are other people willing to talk," Frances assured him. "And we have Beatrice's drawings, the reports from the school. Together we can make a difference." As the driver considered his options, Frances felt her phone vibrate. It was a message from Cecilia. "Beatrice showed up at school today. She's different. Quiet, quieter than usual, and she has marks on her wrists. When I asked what happened, she said she fell out of bed. We need to do something now." Frances showed the message to Carlos, who turned pale. "My God, she was in there this whole time. Mrs. Deborah told me the girl had gone to spend a few days with her paternal grandparents in Atlanta." At that moment, Frances knew she could no longer wait. With or without Robert's cooperation, she needed to act immediately to protect Beatrice. That night at the Fontainebleau Hotel would mark the beginning of a battle that would forever change the lives of everyone involved, especially that of a 6-year-old girl who was silently crying for help through drawings of a golden key and a dark room. Night was falling over Miami as Frances arrived at her apartment in Coconut Grove. Sitting at her kitchen table, she gathered all the evidence she had collected on Beatrice's case: the disturbing drawings, the notes from her interviews with Mr. Joseph, Lorena, and Carlos, the photos of the bruises on the girl's wrists that Cecilia had discreetly sent, and the note found inside Tobias the teddy bear. Marianne Daniels arrived shortly after, carrying a folder of documents and an expression of determination. The lawyer, known for her combative stance in child protection cases, was not easily intimidated, not even when facing Miami's most powerful families. "I've analyzed everything you sent me," Marianne said, spreading documents across the table. "We have enough material to request an emergency protective order and a judicial inspection of the residence. But we need to act quickly, before they have time to prepare a defense or, in worse, hide evidence. What about Robert? Francis asked. Does he really not know what's happening, or is he choosing not to see? Marianne sighed, adjusting her red-framed glasses. It's hard to say. Men like him are masters at compartmentalizing their lives. They spend so much time building empires that they outsource raising their children. Maybe he genuinely doesn't know, or maybe he prefers to believe the version that's most convenient for him. As they discussed their strategy for the case, Francis's phone rang. It was an unknown number. Hesitantly, she answered, "Francis, it's Carlos, the driver. I don't have much time. You need to know, Mrs. Deborah found out I spoke with you. I was fired just a little while ago. But before I left, I overheard her on the phone. She's planning to take Beatrice out of the country tomorrow. Something about an experimental treatment in Switzerland for the girl's condition. It's a lie, of course. I think she just wants to get the child away until things cool down here." The information hit Francis like a punch to the gut. "Are you sure about this, Carlos?" "Absolutely. I heard her booking the tickets. They're leaving on the 10 a.m. flight to Zurich." Francis thanked him for the information and hung up, immediately relaying the conversation to Marianne. "This changes everything," the lawyer said, already grabbing her phone. "I'm calling Judge Helen Baxter right now. She's on call tonight and has worked with me on similar cases. We need a restraining order before that woman leaves the country with the child." While Marianne made the call, Francis felt the weight of the situation. A child's life could change drastically in the next few hours, depending on the speed and effectiveness of their actions. After a series of calls and the urgent dispatch of documents, Marianne finally hung up the phone, a smile of relief on her face. Judge Baxter understood the gravity of the situation. She has issued a court order prohibiting Beatrice from leaving the country and authorizing an inspection of the Monroe residence tomorrow morning, with the presence of Child Protective Services, a forensic psychologist, and, if necessary, police. Francis felt a knot in her throat loosen slightly. It was the first step, but there was still a long way to go. "We can't leave anything to chance," Marianne continued. "I know Deborah Vance from other cases. Before marrying Robert, she was already known in legal circles for her evasive maneuvers in previous lawsuits. We have to be prepared for any scenario." That night, Francis barely slept. Images of Beatrice, alone in that dark room, tormented her thoughts. When dawn finally broke, she was already ready, mentally reviewing every step they would need to take during the inspection. At 7:30 a.m., a small team gathered before the imposing gate of the Monroe mansion. Francis, Marianne, CPS officer Teresa Alvarez, forensic psychologist Dr. Camila Sanchez, and 2 court officers. After identifying themselves over the intercom, they were greeted by a visibly irritated Deborah, who nevertheless maintained a forced smile. "And to what do I owe this invasion of my privacy so early in the morning?" she asked, elegantly dressed in a blue silk ensemble, as if she were already prepared to leave. One of the court officers presented the judicial order, explaining the purpose of the visit. Deborah's expression flickered between surprise and restrained fury. "This is completely absurd," she said, her voice trembling. "My husband will hear about this persecution." "We would like to see Beatrice," Teresa requested firmly. "She's sleeping," Deborah replied quickly. "She had a rough night, with a high fever. The doctor recommended complete rest." "Even so, we need to see her," Francis insisted. "It's part of the procedure." Reluctantly, Deborah led them into the house. The interior was even more impressive than Francis had imagined. Imported furniture, original artwork, a grand staircase leading to the second floor. Everything was impeccably arranged, like a scene from a design magazine. "Beatrice is in her room on the second floor," Deborah said, gesturing towards the stairs. "But I insist you don't disturb her. She needs to rest." "You will come with us," the court officer informed her. As they ascended, Francis observed every detail. There were several closed doors in the second-floor hallway. Deborah led them to the last one on the right, opening it with a key she took from her pocket. Beatrice's room was spacious and decorated in shades of pink and white, fit for a fairy tale princess. There was a canopy bed, shelves full of children's books, a dollhouse that looked like an exact replica of the mansion, and several toys that seemed to have never been used. But Beatrice wasn't there. "Where is the child?" Teresa questioned, looking directly at Deborah. "I don't understand," she replied, feigning confusion. "She should be here. Maybe she went to the bathroom." Quickly, the group checked the ensuite bathroom, which was also empty. "Ladies, please, let's remain calm," Deborah pleaded, trying to control the situation. "Beatrice must be playing somewhere in the house. This mansion is enormous, with many places a child could hide." But Francis noticed something strange about the room. Although luxurious, there were no real signs that a child lived there. There were no clothes out of place, no used toys, no drawings on the walls, or any other mark of Beatrice's presence. It looked more like a showroom than an inhabited space. "We will search the entire house," Marianne ordered, "and I suggest you cooperate, Mrs. Vance. Obstructing a judicial proceeding is a crime." Splitting into pairs, the group began to search the massive mansion. Francis and Dr. Sanchez were responsible for the ground floor and outdoor areas. As they checked each room, Francis noted an important detail. In the photos scattered around the house, Beatrice always appeared next to her father, never alone with Deborah. And in each of those images, her smile seemed forced, her eyes devoid of joy. It was in the backyard garden that Francis saw something that jogged her memory, an attached structure, separate from the main house, with a single small, high window. It looked like the place Lorena, the former housekeeper, had described. "Dr. Sanchez, I think I found something," Francis said, pointing to the structure. As they approached, they noticed the door had an old, ornate lock, exactly like the one Beatrice had drawn. Francis felt her heart race. They called the others to the location. When everyone was gathered before the door, Deborah intervened. "This is just a storage shed. There's nothing of interest here," she said, trying to sound casual. "It's locked because we keep some valuable items inside. I can show you later when I find the key." "The golden key?" Francis asked, watching Deborah's reaction closely. The woman's face visibly paled. "I don't know what you're talking about." One of the court officers spoke up. "Ma'am, the court order authorizes us to check every room on the property. We can break down the door if necessary." "This is outrageous," Deborah protested, her voice rising an octave. "I'm calling my lawyer immediately." While Deborah argued with the officers, Francis noticed something. A small potted plant near the door had disturbed soil. Acting on instinct, she dug her fingers into the dirt and, to her surprise, found something metallic. It was a large, golden key, exactly like the one in Beatrice's drawings. "I believe I've found the key," she announced, showing it to the group. Deborah's expression turned to panic. "This is trespassing. You have no right to—" Ignoring the protests, the officer inserted the key into the lock. The door swung open with a creak, revealing a dark space. Someone flipped a light switch, illuminating a small, nearly empty room. The walls were lined with acoustic material. There was a thin mattress on the floor, a bucket in the corner, and at the far end, huddled and hugging her knees, was Beatrice. The silence that followed was deafening. The girl looked up with frightened eyes, blinking against the sudden light. When she saw Francis, something in her gaze shifted. It wasn't hope yet, but the recognition of a face that didn't represent a threat. "Beatrice," Francis called softly, kneeling to be at the girl's level. "You're safe now. We've come to get you." Deborah tried to intervene. "This isn't what it looks like. Beatrice has episodes. She needs a contained space." "Silence," ordered Teresa, the CPS officer, with an authority that brooked no argument. "You will have a chance to explain yourself, but not now." Dr. Sanchez carefully approached Beatrice, introducing herself and explaining that she was a doctor who helped children. With gentleness, she managed to convince her to leave the room for a preliminary examination. While the psychologist attended to Beatrice, Deborah was informed of her rights and the gravity of the situation. Desperation began to replace her arrogant demeanor. "You don't understand," she said, now with tears in her eyes. "This girl isn't normal. She has outbursts, breaks things, hurts herself. I was just trying to protect her." "Protect her by locking her in a windowless room?" Francis questioned, containing the rage she felt. "By keeping her from school, by leaving her alone for hours?" "Robert would never accept this," Deborah continued, as if she hadn't heard. He treats her like a porcelain doll, but he's not the one who deals with her every day. He's not the one who sacrificed his career and social life to care for another woman's child. Deborah's words revealed more than she intended. It wasn't just cruelty. There was a deep resentment there, a sick jealousy of the relationship between father and daughter, an inability to accept that she would never completely replace Beatrice's deceased mother. After the initial assessment, Dr. Sanchez confirmed what everyone already suspected. Beatrice showed signs of prolonged neglect and psychological abuse. There were ligature marks on her wrists and ankles, indicating she had been tied up. She was dehydrated and showed signs of mild malnutrition. But the deepest damage wasn't physical. It was in her vacant stare and the silence that seemed to have swallowed her voice. Based on the evidence, the CPS officer ordered Beatrice's immediate removal from the home, applying an emergency protective measure. The girl would be temporarily placed in a specialized institution while the case was investigated further. "Can I take something with me?" Beatrice asked, speaking for the first time since she was found. Her voice was barely a whisper. "Of course you can, sweetie," Frances replied gently. "What would you like to take?" "Tobias," she said. "My teddy bear." Frances felt a lump in her throat, remembering the bear she had borrowed to examine. "We'll find Tobias for you," she promised. In Beatrice's room, while helping the girl pack some clothes and personal items, Frances took a moment alone to discreetly return the teddy bear, placing it on the bed. "Tobias!" Beatrice exclaimed upon seeing him, running to hug him. It was the first time a genuine smile lit up her face. "I thought Aunt Deborah threw him away." "No, he was just hiding," Frances replied, feeling a bit guilty for the half-truth. "He was waiting for you." As Beatrice hugged the bear, Frances noticed something strange. The girl was whispering into the toy's ear, as if telling a secret. Approaching discreetly, she managed to hear a few words. "We're getting out of here, Tobias. You were right." That casual comment sent a shiver down Frances's spine. The bear wasn't just an object of comfort, it was a confidant, perhaps the only one Beatrice trusted. How many secrets did that worn-out plush toy hold? How many nights of fear and loneliness had it witnessed? As they prepared to leave the mansion, a car screeched to a halt at the entrance. Robert Monroe got out hurriedly, his face contorted in an expression of disbelief and fury. "What is the meaning of this?" he yelled as he entered, confronted by the scene in the foyer. Court officers, the CPS officer, and Beatrice holding a small suitcase. "Deborah called me saying you're trying to take my daughter. This is a kidnapping." "Mr. Monroe," Marianne intervened firmly, "this is a legal action based on evidence of abuse and neglect. Your daughter was found locked in an isolated room without adequate food and prevented from attending school. We have a court order." Robert seemed genuinely shocked. "What are you talking about? What room? Beatrice has the most beautiful room money can buy." "Dad," Beatrice's small voice cut through the tension like a knife. "It's true. Aunt Deborah puts me there when you travel. She says it's to teach me how to behave." The entrepreneur looked at his daughter, then at his wife and back at his daughter. The confusion in his eyes slowly gave way to a painful understanding. He knelt before Beatrice, taking her small hands in his. "Honey, why did you never tell me?" "I tried," she answered, her voice choked with emotion. "But Aunt Deborah said you wouldn't believe me, that you'd be mad, because I'm always making up stories." Frances watched the scene with a heavy heart. This powerful man, accustomed to controlling everything around him, suddenly seemed small and lost. He had neglected what was happening right under his nose, delegating the care of his daughter to a woman who saw the child as an obstacle between her and her husband's fortune. "I can show you, Dad," Beatrice continued, with surprising courage. "Come with me." Taking her father's hand, the girl led him to the room at the back of the house, still open after the inspection. Robert stopped at the entrance, staring in disbelief at the austere, suffocating space where his daughter had been confined. "My God," he murmured, running a hand through his hair in a gesture of despair. "Beatrice, I didn't know." "I know, Dad," she replied, squeezing his hand. "You were never here to know." That simple sentence, spoken without accusation but heavy with truth, seemed to hit Robert harder than any reprimand. Years of absence, of prioritizing business over fatherhood, of blindly trusting someone who didn't deserve his trust, now weighed on his shoulders. Returning to the main hall, Robert confronted Deborah. "How could you do this to my daughter in my house?" "You don't understand," she replied, her mask of perfection completely shattered. "This girl is impossible. She does everything to sabotage me, to drive us apart. She's still obsessed with her dead mother and hates me for trying to take her place." "I never asked you to take my mom's place," Beatrice said, surprising everyone with her lucidity. "I just wanted you to like me." The silence that followed was heavy, laden with revelations and long-suppressed truths. "Ladies and gentlemen," Teresa, the CPS officer, intervened. "Regardless of the explanations, we have a court order to enforce. Beatrice needs to come with us for a full evaluation and to ensure her safety while the case is investigated." Robert seemed about to protest, but then he looked again at his daughter's face. Not the idealized face he kept in his mind during his long trips, but the real face of a child who had suffered alone for far too long. Something shifted in his expression. "I understand," he said finally. "And I will cooperate fully, but I need to know, where will you take her?" "To St. Jude's shelter," Teresa replied. "It's an excellent institution where she will receive proper care and psychological support. You will be able to visit her under supervision while the process is ongoing." Robert nodded, resigned. He knelt again before his daughter. "Beatrice, I promise I will fix this. All of this. I will bring you back home, but to a real home this time. Do you trust me?" The girl looked at her father for a long moment, then at Francis, as if seeking confirmation that she could, in fact, trust that promise. Francis gave a slight nod, encouraging her. "I trust you, Dad," Beatrice replied finally, hugging him tightly. As they prepared to leave, Deborah, who had been watching the scene with a mix of anger and desperation, made one last move. She grabbed Robert's arm. "You can't let them take her. We're a family. Think of the scandal. What your investors will say." Robert firmly removed her hand. "Enough, Deborah. You betrayed my trust in the worst possible way. There's no coming back from this." As Francis led Beatrice to the car, the girl stopped one last time and looked at the imposing mansion where she had lived for the last few years of her short life. There was no sadness in her eyes, only the quiet relief of someone finally leaving a place of pain behind. In the car, as they drove away from Star Island, Beatrice sat between Francis and Dr. Sanchez, still clutching Tobias the teddy bear. Through the window, the Miami sky opened up in an intense blue, like a promise of better days. "Francis," Beatrice called in a low voice, "do you think it will be long before I can go home?" "I can't say for sure, sweetie," Francis answered honestly, "but I can promise that we will do everything to make it as soon as possible." "That's okay," the girl said, surprisingly calm. "I waited a long time in the dark room. I can wait a little longer, if it's to go back to a better place." The wisdom contained in that simple sentence, coming from a child who had faced more adversity than many adults, deeply touched Francis. In her career as a social worker, she had seen many difficult cases, many stories of resilience. But there was something special about Beatrice, a resilience that not even confinement and fear had managed to break. As the car moved through the streets of Miami, Beatrice looked at the urban landscape with curious eyes, as if seeing it all for the first time. And in a way, that's exactly what it was. Her first day of true freedom, after years of living in the shadows of a house that was never really a home. The case of Beatrice Monroe was just beginning to unfold. There would be legal proceedings, psychological evaluations, a long battle for custody. But at that moment, in the back seat of an ordinary car, with a worn-out teddy bear in her arms and the blue sky reflected in her eyes, she had already won her first and most important victory: the right to be a child, simply a child, with all the joys, fears, and hopes that entails. And for Francis, who silently watched Beatrice's small profile against the window, that victory meant everything. It was a reminder of why she had chosen this profession, of why she kept fighting, day after day, against the indifference of a system that often seemed designed to fail the most vulnerable. Because sometimes, against all odds, it was possible to make a difference. It was possible to find a golden key and open the right door. The days following Beatrice's rescue were a whirlwind of legal procedures, depositions, and sensationalist headlines. The case had exploded in the Miami press with unexpected force, quickly becoming one of the most talked-about scandals of the year. Cruel stepmother, tech empire heiress held in private captivity, blared the city's best-selling newspaper. At St. Jude's Shelter, a model institution located in a historic mansion in the Coral Gables neighborhood, Beatrice slowly began to adapt to her new routine. The place, run by a team of dedicated professionals, was an oasis of tranquility amidst the urban chaos, ample gardens, colorful rooms, and most importantly, no locked doors. Francis visited Beatrice daily, monitoring her adaptation process and participating in the therapy sessions conducted by Dr. Sanchez. In these sessions, held in a cozy room decorated with children's drawings, Beatrice gradually began to express what she had lived through, using games and art. "I'm impressed with her resilience," Dr. Sanchez commented after one such session, while having coffee with Francis on the shelter's veranda. Children who go through prolonged trauma often develop severe emotional blocks. But Beatrice, she has an extraordinary capacity for processing. "Do you think this will permanently affect her development?" Francis asked, watching through the window as the girl played in the garden with other children. "It's too soon to say," the psychologist replied. "But she has important protective factors, above-average intelligence, good communication skills when she feels safe, and now a support network. The most important thing is that we were able to intervene before the damage became irreversible." Meanwhile, in the legal arena, the case was moving forward quickly. Robert Monroe, visibly shaken by everything he had discovered, hired the best lawyers not to defend Deborah, as she had expected, but to sue his own wife for child abuse and secure exclusive custody of Beatrice. Deborah's reaction was immediate and explosive. Feeling betrayed by her husband, she gave a bombshell interview to a sensationalist television program where she positioned herself as the victim of a conspiracy orchestrated by disgruntled employees and an emotionally unstable social worker. "Beatrice has been a problem child since I met her," she declared, with meticulously rehearsed tears. "She has violent episodes, makes up stories, hurts herself to frame me. I was only trying to protect her and myself. That room was a therapeutic space, recommended by specialists in children with behavioral disorders." The interview generated a national stir, dividing public opinion. While some sympathized with the story Deborah told, the majority expressed outrage at her justifications for confining a child. Marianne Daniels, after watching the interview, immediately called Francis. "Did you see that? She's trying to control the narrative, turning the girl into a monster and herself into a victim. It's a classic abuser tactic. Reverse the roles, question the victim's sanity. We need to be prepared, because this is just the beginning of the media war." "What can we do?" Francis asked, worried about the impact those statements could have on Beatrice and the progress of the case. "For now, we keep our focus on the concrete evidence and protect Beatrice from exposure. I've already spoken with the judge to prohibit any interviews with the child, and I've contacted some more serious journalists to counter her version with facts." One of those journalists was Paul Henry Miller, known for his investigative work on cases of corruption and abuse of power. Unlike colleagues who were covering the case as a celebrity scandal, Paul Henry was interested in the deeper layers of the story. "There's something about this woman that intrigues me," he told Francis over coffee in the city center. "After I got your tip, I started digging into Deborah Vance's past, and I found some curious patterns." He opened a folder and began to show Francis the results of his investigation. Before marrying Robert, Deborah had been married twice, always to significantly older and wealthier men. The first husband, a real estate mogul, had died in circumstances deemed accidental, a drowning during a yacht trip. The second owner of a hotel chain died after a fall at home, alone with Deborah. In both cases, she had inherited considerable fortunes, always protected by favorable prenuptial agreements and perfect alibis. "I'm not suggesting she's a murderer," Paul Henry clarified, noticing Francis's shocked expression, "but there's definitely a pattern of opportunism and manipulation, and in both previous marriages, there were rumors of mistreatment of staff and erratic behavior, although nothing was ever formally reported." "And what about Robert?" Do you think he could also be in danger? Francis asked, feeling a chill at the thought. Hard to say. He's significantly younger than her previous husbands and is, as far as we know, in excellent health. But he is indisputably the richest of the three, and now that he's turning against her publicly, the implication hung in the air like a dark cloud. Francis thanked the journalist for the information and promised to keep him updated on the case, as long as he treated the matter with the seriousness and ethics the situation demanded. As she returned home that day, Francis reflected on how an investigation that had started as a simple routine visit had unfolded into something so complex. It had begun with her following her instinct about a child in danger, and now she was unraveling a web of lies, manipulation, and potentially something even more sinister. The next day, during her daily visit to the shelter, Francis found Beatrice sitting under a mango tree in the garden, drawing intently. "What are you drawing today?" she asked, sitting down next to the girl. "Our new house," Beatrice replied, showing the drawing. A simple house, very different from the mansion where she used to live, with flowers in the garden, a dog, and 3 figures holding hands. A large one, a medium one, and a small one. "And who are these people?" Francis inquired, though she already suspected the answer. "This is Dad," Beatrice explained, pointing to the largest figure. "This is me. And this one." She hesitated for a moment. "This is you, Francis." The social worker felt a lump in her throat. The bond forming between them was stronger than she had anticipated, and that worried her. Professionally, she knew she should maintain a certain emotional distance, but there was something about Beatrice, perhaps her quiet courage, perhaps the way she trusted despite all she had been through, that made it impossible not to care deeply. "Beatrice," she said carefully, "you know we won't be living together, right? When all this is over, you'll probably go live with your dad." The girl looked at her with a wisdom that seemed out of place on her childish face. "I know, but you'll still be my friend, won't you?" "Always," Francis promised, knowing she was crossing a professional line, but unable to offer less to this child who had already faced so many losses. That same afternoon, Robert Monroe visited the shelter for the first time since Beatrice had been removed from the home. There was a palpable tension in the air when he arrived, dressed casually in jeans and a t-shirt, so different from the public image of the always impeccable entrepreneur in expensive suits. "Is she ready to see me?" he asked Francis, the nervousness evident in his voice. "Beatrice is a very smart and perceptive girl," Francis replied. "She understands more than we imagine, and has been dealing with all of this with impressive courage, but she's still a child who has been through significant trauma. Take it slow, no pressure, and above all, be honest with her." The meeting took place in the shelter's visiting room, a cozy space with colorful sofas and a bookshelf full of games and books. Beatrice, who had been prepared for the moment by Dr. Sanchez, entered the room hesitantly. Tobias held firmly against her chest. "Hi, honey," Robert said, his voice choked, remaining seated so as not to intimidate the girl with his height. "I've missed you so much." "Hi, Dad," she replied, stopping a few feet away, as if assessing the territory. "Can I give you a hug?" Beatrice thought for a moment, then nodded slowly. Robert wrapped her in a careful embrace, as if afraid she might break. Francis and Dr. Sanchez watched the scene from a discreet distance, ready to intervene if necessary. But to their surprise, the meeting flowed naturally. After the initial discomfort, Beatrice began to open up, showing her father her drawings, talking about her new routine at the shelter, the other children she had befriended. "Are you mad at me, Dad?" she asked suddenly, in the middle of a conversation about the shelter's garden. "Mad? No, sweetie, not at all," Robert answered, genuinely surprised. "Why would I be?" "Because I told the secret. Aunt Deborah always said you'd be mad if I told—" Robert closed his eyes for a moment, as if absorbing a physical blow. When he opened them again, they were misty. "Beatrice, listen to me carefully. You did absolutely nothing wrong. Nothing. I was the one who was wrong, for not seeing what was happening, for not being there when you needed me. And I am so sorry for that." It was the first time Francis had seen Robert openly accept his share of the blame, without trying to hide behind justifications about work or responsibilities. That moment of vulnerability and honesty seemed to mark the beginning of a transformation in the relationship between father and daughter. At the end of the visit, Robert asked for a moment alone with Francis. "How are things on the legal front?" she asked when they were in the hallway. "Complicated," he admitted. "Deborah is fighting tooth and nail. She's hired very expensive lawyers and is spreading all sorts of stories about me and Beatrice. She says I always knew about the therapeutic room, that I approved of the method, and that I'm now denying it to preserve my public image." "And the divorce?" "In progress, but she refuses to leave the house, says she's entitled to half of everything, and in the meantime, she's been appearing on every TV show that will have her, painting herself as the victim of a setup." Francis observed the man before her. In the last few days, Robert Monroe seemed to have aged years. The confident, controlling entrepreneur had given way to a desperate father, fighting to get his daughter back and rebuild his life. "Has she mentioned anything about a settlement?" Francis asked, remembering Paul Henry's investigation. "Yes, she proposed that I give her a generous compensation in exchange for her dropping the accusations against me and facilitating the divorce," he replied, running a hand through his hair in frustration. "Basically, she wants a fortune to go away quietly. And are you considering it?" "Honestly, yes. Not for the money, that's the least of it. But to end this media circus and allow Beatrice to come home as soon as possible without having to go through a draining trial." Francis understood the logic, but something about the situation bothered her deeply. People like Deborah rarely give up so easily, even with financial compensation. There was something else at play. "Have you talked to your lawyers about this?" she questioned. "Yes, they think it's the quickest way out, but I wanted to hear your opinion. You know the system. You know how long these things can take." "Robert," Francis said cautiously, "I know you want to resolve this quickly for Beatrice's sake, and that's admirable. But I'd like you to consider something. Deborah has shown a pattern of manipulative and potentially dangerous behavior. Allowing her to walk away from this situation, not only rich, but also without any legal consequences, could set a problematic precedent. You think she could come back?" he asked, catching her implicit concern. "I can't predict the future, but people with this profile rarely disappear completely from their victims' lives, especially when there's a lot of money involved." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Beatrice, who came to show them another drawing she had made. This time, a colourful depiction of what looked like a dining room, with a lavish table and people gathered around it. "What's this, sweetie?" Robert asked, grateful for the distraction. "It's Christmas at our new house," she explained matter-of-factly. "Look, this is you, this is me, this is Tobias, and these are our friends." Among the friends she had drawn, Beatrice had included Francis, Dr. Sanchez, and even Teresa, the CPS officer. It was an optimistic vision of a future where trauma had been replaced by celebration and community. Robert looked at Francis, a new determination in his eyes. "You're right. I can't just buy an easy way out of this. I need to ensure that Beatrice is truly safe in the long run." In the days that followed, the legal battle intensified. Deborah, realizing that Robert would not accept her deal, changed tactics. She began to claim that she had also been a victim of psychological abuse by her husband, that he had isolated her from friends and family, controlled her financially, and threatened her if she tried to report Beatrice's behavioral problems. "It's a classic strategy," Marianne explained to Francis as they reviewed the new documents submitted by Deborah's lawyers. When the devoted mother narrative didn't work, she switched to the abused woman one, trying to capitalize on the growing awareness of domestic violence. "But that makes no sense," Francis protested. "All the evidence points to the contrary. She was the one who isolated Beatrice, who fired staff close to the girl, who created an environment of fear." "Yes, but it's her word against ours, and unfortunately, in the court of public opinion, the one who shouts the loudest is often heard first." The case was becoming increasingly complex and mediatized. Journalists camped out in front of Robert's office, St. Jude's shelter, and even the building where Francis lived. The story had captured the public's imagination. The heiress held captive, the cruel stepmother, the absent father, the social worker determined to save her. In the midst of this whirlwind, Francis received daily calls from television producers offering considerable sums for an exclusive interview. She systematically refused them all, reaffirming her commitment to professional ethics and above all, to Beatrice's well-being. But not everyone shared her scruples. One day, upon arriving at the shelter for her usual visit, she found the staff in a state of agitation. During the night, someone had hacked into the security system and gained access to images of Beatrice playing in the garden. The photos, clearly taken with a long-range telephoto lens, were plastered on the cover of a popular tabloid under the headline, "Exclusive, the life of the heiress in a public shelter." "How is this possible?" Francis asked, outraged. "I thought the shelter's address was confidential." "And it was," and Teresa replied, equally shocked. "Someone with a lot of influence and money got this information. We've already called the police, but the damage is done." The improper exposure of Beatrice in the sensationalist media was more than an ethical violation. It was a direct threat to her safety and psychological well-being. Immediately, the judge in the case issued an order prohibiting any media outlet from publishing images of the child under penalty of severe fines. But for Francis, the main concern was how Beatrice would handle this invasion of privacy. Surprisingly, the girl seemed more worried about the adults around her than about herself. "Don't be sad," she said during a session with Dr. Sanchez, which Francis was observing. "It's just a picture of me playing. That's not a secret. But it's your privacy, Beatrice," Francis explained. "No one had the right to take those pictures without your permission. In the big house, Aunt Deborah took pictures of me all the time for the magazines," she replied with a shrug. "She said it was important to show everyone how happy we were." The casualness with which Beatrice mentioned these manipulations of her image revealed how normalized the violation of her boundaries had become. For her, having no control over her own life or image was simply the natural state of things. It was in this context that Paul Henry, the investigative journalist, brought new and disturbing information. In his search into Deborah's past, he had discovered that her maiden name was not Vanson but Smith. The change had occurred legally years before, when she began her ascent in Miami society. Even more significantly, under her original name, there were police records of petty scams and fraud, all dismissed without conviction, thanks to the intervention of expensive lawyers, presumably paid for by her patrons of the time. "She's a complete fabrication, built from scratch," Paul Henry explained, showing Francis old photographs of a young Deborah, then Lucy Smith, at parties with older, influential men. She invented a past of a traditional family in decline, studies in Europe, a whole history that legitimized her in the circles she began to frequent. This revelation explained a lot about Deborah's behavior, her obsession with status and appearances, her constant fear of being unmasked, her cruelty towards anyone who threatened her fragile house of cards. But the most alarming part was what this implied about her real intentions with Robert and, especially, with Beatrice. If she was willing to go to such lengths to maintain her charade, what else was she capable of? Francis decided to share these findings with Robert immediately. They met at a discreet cafe in the Brickell neighborhood, far from the places they both usually frequented. "This is all surreal," he commented, after listening intently. "How did I not see it? How did no one see it?" "People like her are extremely skilled at creating and maintaining personas," Francis explained, "and you were vulnerable after losing your wife, seeking stability for Beatrice." Robert was silent for a long moment, absorbing the implications of these revelations. "What do we do now?" he finally asked. "This information could be crucial for the legal proceedings, especially if we can prove she deliberately concealed her past to get close to you and your fortune. But we need to be strategic. If she feels she's cornered..." The sentence hung in the air, laden with disturbing possibilities. That same night, as she was returning home, Francis noticed a black car that seemed to have been following her since she left the metro rail station. Quickening her pace, she entered a shop and waited. The car parked across the street, its driver hidden by tinted windows. With her heart racing, Francis called Marianne, explaining the situation. "Don't leave there," the lawyer instructed. "I'm sending someone to pick you up." And Francis, "Be careful. This case is getting more dangerous than we imagined." While she waited, Francis thought of Beatrice, safe in the shelter, drawing her happy futures, trusting that the adults in her life would finally protect her. She thought of Robert, struggling to redeem himself from years of neglect. And she thought of Deborah, or Lucy, or whatever her real name was, a woman who had built an entire life on lies and was now watching it all crumble. The case that had started as a simple suspicion during a routine visit had transformed into a dangerous search for the truth, with implications that went far beyond the well-being of a single child. It was a mirror of Miami society, with its glaring inequalities, its carefully maintained appearances, and its dark secrets kept behind high walls and expensive security systems. And at the center of it all, a small 6-year-old warrior who, armed only with drawings and a worn-out teddy bear, had found the courage to say, "Enough." "This is an exceptionally complex and sensitive case," she began. "It involves not only legal issues, but also profound considerations about the psychological well-being of a child and the functioning of our protection networks." The judge flipped through her notes before continuing. After carefully analyzing all the evidence presented, including witness testimonies, psychological reports, school records, and reports from Child Protective Services, I have reached the following preliminary conclusions. The silence in the room was absolute. Frances could hear her own breathing. First, there is compelling evidence that the minor, Beatrice Monroe, was subjected to inadequate care and forms of treatment that constitute, at a minimum, neglect and psychological abuse. Second, the reports presented by Mrs. Vance's defense contain serious inconsistencies and will be subject to an investigation regarding their authenticity. Third, Mr. Robert Monroe, although he did not directly participate in the abuse, failed in his duty of supervision and protection, allowing such situations to occur in his residence. The judge paused, looking directly at Deborah. Fourth, Mrs. Vance's allegations regarding the minor's problematic behavior are not supported by school reports, testimonies from professionals who interacted with the child before and after her removal from the home, nor by the forensic psychological evaluation. Deborah visibly paled, her fingers gripping the edge of the table tightly. In light of these findings, the judge continued, I hereby order the following. The protective measure in favor of Beatrice Monroe will be maintained. The minor will remain temporarily housed at St. Jude's Shelter, where she will continue to receive psychological support. Mr. Robert Monroe will be entitled to supervised visits, to be gradually extended based on the evaluation of the technical team. Additionally, he must participate in a mandatory family guidance and support program. Mrs. Deborah Vance is prohibited from having any contact with the minor until the final judgment of the case. I also order the issuance of a search and seizure warrant for all electronic devices in her possession, in search of additional evidence. Finally, I am forwarding a complete copy of the case file to the District Attorney's Office for evaluation regarding the possible initiation of criminal proceedings against Mrs. Vance for abuse, false imprisonment, and forgery of documents. The judge banged her gavel, ending the session. The reaction was immediate. Deborah stood up abruptly, her face contorted in an expression that shifted between fury and panic. Her lawyers quickly surrounded her, guiding her out of the room before she could do anything to worsen her situation. Robert remained seated, his expression a mix of relief and concern. Frances approached him. Are you okay? I don't know, he answered honestly. Sized part of me is relieved that Beatrice is protected and that Deborah is being held accountable. But another part, I feel like I've failed in every aspect. The judge is right. I should have seen what was happening in my own house. Robert, Frances said gently, the important thing now is to focus on the future. You have the chance to rebuild your relationship with Beatrice, to be the father she needs. Guilt is only useful if it motivates us to change. He nodded slowly, absorbing her words. What happens now? Marianne, who had approached at that moment, replied, Now we start working on your defense for the final trial, demonstrating your commitment to Beatrice's well-being. We also need to prepare Beatrice for potential testimony, although we will do everything possible to spare her that ordeal. As they left the courthouse, they had to face a crowd of journalists waiting outside. Cameras, microphones, and shouted questions blended into a deafening chaos. Marianne, taking on the role of spokesperson, made a brief statement. Justice has taken its first step today in defense of a child whose rights were violated. We remain confident in the judicial system and focused on Beatrice's well-being. We will not be making any further statements at this time. In the days that followed, the case dominated the news and social media. Opinions were divided, as expected, while the majority supported the protective measures for Beatrice. Some questioned the narrative. Influenced by the media campaign orchestrated by Deborah before the hearing, Frances, for her part, focused on what truly mattered: Beatrice's progress. Her daily visits to the shelter became moments of deep professional and personal satisfaction. Each day, the girl seemed more at ease, more talkative, more connected with her emotions and the world around her. "She is blossoming," Dr. Sanchez commented during one of their weekly evaluation meetings. "Her resilience is astounding. Of course, there's still a lot of work ahead. Traumas like hers leave deep scars. But I am genuinely optimistic about her recovery." Robert's supervised visits also showed significant progress, initially awkward and marked by uncomfortable silences. The interactions between father and daughter gradually became more natural. Robert, following the guidance of the psychosocial team, was learning to truly listen to Beatrice, to value her interests, to actively participate in her games without trying to control or direct everything. "Dad taught me how to play chess today," Beatrice told Frances excitedly after one of the visits. "He said, I'm very good at thinking about the next moves. And then we had a picnic in the garden with sandwiches he made himself." It was clear that a new bond was forming between them, no longer based on expensive gifts or appearances maintained for photographs, but on genuine moments of connection and affection. Meanwhile, the investigation into Deborah advanced on multiple fronts. The technical forensics confirmed that the medical reports presented in court were, in fact, forged. Dr. Richard Edwards, when located and questioned, confessed to signing the documents without ever having examined Beatrice, in exchange for a generous donation to his private clinic. Even more disturbingly, the analysis of the electronic devices seized from the mansion revealed a systematic surveillance scheme. Deborah had installed hidden cameras in several rooms, including Beatrice's bedroom and Robert's office. The recordings, stored on a private server, showed not only the episodes of abuse against the girl, but also confidential business meetings, intimate conversations, and other potentially compromising material. "She was building an arsenal," explained Paul Henry, the investigative journalist, when Frances shared these findings with him. "Material for blackmail to protect herself if things went wrong. It's consistent with the pattern I identified in her previous relationships." Faced with this overwhelming evidence, Deborah's defense strategy changed drastically. Her lawyers now sought a plea bargain with the district attorney's office, offering cooperation in exchange for reduced sentences. It was speculated that she might reveal information about other influential people involved in questionable activities. For Frances, however, the most surprising twist came from an unexpected source. On an August morning, she received a call from Teresa, the CPS officer. "You're not going to believe this," she said, her voice agitated with excitement. "We received a letter addressed to Beatrice. The sender is Adrienne Monroe." "Beatrice's mother?" Frances asked, confused. "But she—" "Exactly. That's what makes this so extraordinary. The letter was sent from Mexico 3 days ago. Adrienne Monroe is alive, and Frances." The revelation was bombshell. Adrienne, whom everyone believed had died in a car accident 3 years earlier, had apparently faked her own disappearance and rebuilt her life in another country. In the letter, written in a desperate tone, she explained that she had fled because she feared for her life after discovering illicit activities in Robert's companies. She had believed, mistakenly, that Beatrice would be safer staying with her father than fleeing with her. "I only found out what really happened when I saw the news about the case in the international papers," she wrote. "I can no longer live with the guilt of having abandoned my daughter. I need to see her, to explain, to try to repair the damage I caused." The letter was immediately forwarded to the authorities for authentication, and the court was informed of the new and stunning development. "Ooh, this changes everything," Marianne commented when Frances told her the situation. "If Adrienne is really alive, and if she can prove she fled out of legitimate fear, this opens a new dimension to the case, and it puts Robert in a potentially darker light." "Do you think he knew," Frances asked, trying to process the implications, "that Adrienne was alive this whole time?" "It's hard to say. If he knew, why would he marry Deborah so quickly? On the other hand, if Adrienne's allegations about illicit activities are true, the investigation into the letter proceeded with impressive speed. In less than 48 hours, Mexican authorities confirmed that a woman using the name Laura Campos, but with fingerprints matching those of Adrienne Monroe, had been living in a suburb of Mexico City for approximately 3 years. She worked as a Portuguese teacher at a language school and led a modest life, without any ostentation. Confronted with this information, Robert seemed genuinely shocked. "That's impossible," he repeated, incredulous. "I saw her. The body. There was a funeral." A new round of investigations revealed the truth. The accident had been meticulously staged. The body identified as Adrienne's was, in fact, that of an unknown woman with similar physical characteristics. The fraud had been possible thanks to the corruption of morgue and insurance company employees who issued the necessary documents without proper verification. But the crucial question remained: had Robert participated in the scheme, or had he been deceived as well? The answer came in the form of emails recovered from an old server, dated around the time of the supposed accident. In correspondence between Adrienne and her personal lawyer, she expressed fear for her life after discovering that Robert was involved in money laundering schemes through his tech companies. She particularly feared Henry Vance, an investor close to Robert, who had made veiled threats when she mentioned taking her findings to the authorities. Henry Vance? Francis frowned upon reading the name. Why does that sound familiar? It was Paul Henry who connected the dots. Henry was the older brother of Deborah, or rather, of Lucy Smith, before her reinvention as a socialite. The siblings had worked together on several fraudulent schemes before Lucy adopted her new identity. That explains how Deborah entered Robert's life so quickly after the accident, Francis concluded. It wasn't a coincidence. It was a setup from the beginning. With this new evidence, the case took a completely unexpected turn. Henry Vance was located in Switzerland and became the target of an extradition request. Robert, though initially investigated as a possible accomplice, was gradually ruled out as an active participant in the scheme, although he remained under scrutiny for possible negligence and willful blindness regarding the origin of some investments in his companies. Deborah, confronted with the newly discovered connections to her brother, finally broke. In a plea deal, she confessed that she had been planted in Robert's life with the specific goal of monitoring his actions and ensuring he never discovered the truth about Adrienne's accident. Her marriage, her posture as a dedicated stepmother, it was all part of an elaborate sham. "And what about Beatrice?" the prosecutor asked during the deposition. "Why the abuse?" Deborah's answer was as cold as it was revealing. The girl was an obstacle, too attached to her father, too curious, is always wanting attention. And worse, she was the living image of Adrienne, a constant reminder of what Robert had lost. I needed to isolate her, diminish her, ensure her voice wouldn't be heard. At first, it was just convenient. Later, I admit, it became something more personal. For Beatrice, these revelations were presented gradually, with extreme psychological care. The news that her mother was alive was initially met with suspicion, a natural defense mechanism for a child who had already suffered so many betrayals. "What if it's not true?" she asked Francis, clutching Tobias the teddy bear as if it were a shield. "What if it's another one of Aunt Deborah's lies?" "It's not a lie," Francis assured her gently. "Your mother is really alive, and she wants to see you very much. But it will only happen when you're ready, and if you want it to. No one will force you to do anything." The reunion between mother and daughter was carefully planned and took place in the safe environment of St. Jude's shelter with psychological support. It was a moment of conflicting emotions, joy, confusion, hurt, hope, for both of them. Adrienne, now with shorter hair and without the sophistication that characterized her in her previous life, cried when she saw how much Beatrice had grown, how much of her life she had missed. Beatrice, in turn, vacillated between distrust and a desperate desire to believe that this was really her mother, who had returned to save her. "I dreamed about you," the girl finally said, after long minutes of silent observation. "Many times in the dark room I talked to you." "I am so sorry, my daughter," Adrienne replied, her voice choked. "I'm so sorry I wasn't there when you needed me most. It was the biggest mistake of my life, and I will spend the rest of my days trying to make up for it." In the months that followed, a new family configuration slowly began to take shape. Robert, after being cleared of the most serious charges but still facing consequences for negligence towards his daughter, retained the right to supervised visits. Adrienne, legally resurrected after proving she had fled out of well-founded fear, began the process of regaining custody of Beatrice. The girl, for her part, blossomed more and more under the care of the shelter staff and Francis's constant support. Her sessions with Dr. Sanchez evolved from dark drawings of keys and locked rooms to colorful representations of her new family, which included not only her parents, but also the people who had fought for her: Francis, Teresa, Dr. Sanchez, and even Tobias, the confidant bear who had kept her secrets in the darkest days. On a sunny afternoon in October, almost 9 months after the fateful visit that had started the entire investigation, Francis received a call from Judge Helen Baxter. The case had finally reached a resolution. Adrienne would receive primary custody of Beatrice, with regular visits from Robert. The family would settle in a house in the Kendall neighborhood, far from the opulence of Star Island, but close enough to facilitate co-parenting. Beatrice would continue with psychological support and return to school the next semester. "And what about Deborah?" Francis asked, using the name she still thought of the woman by, though she now knew her true identity was different. Sentenced to 8 years in a closed regime for multiple crimes, including false imprisonment, child abuse, forgery, and criminal association, the judge replied, "Her brother, Henry, is being extradited from Switzerland and will face even more serious charges." Hanging up the phone, Francis felt a mix of relief, professional satisfaction, and a pang of melancholy. The case that had consumed so many months of her life was coming to an end. Beatrice was safe. Justice had been served. A new phase was beginning for everyone involved. There was one last visit to make. At St. Jude's shelter, Beatrice already knew the news. She ran to hug Francis as soon as she saw her, her eyes shining with excitement. "I'm going to live with Mom, and Dad will visit on weekends, and we can get a dog. Mom already said yes." "That's wonderful, Beatrice," Francis smiled, crouching to be at the girl's level. "I'm so happy for you." "You'll visit me too, won't you?" Beatrice asked, suddenly serious. "At the new house?" Francis hesitated. She knew it was important to establish professional boundaries, that her role in Beatrice's life was technically ending, but she also knew that the bonds formed during the case transcended bureaucratic formalities. "Of course I will," she finally replied. "If your mother agrees, I'd be happy to visit you from time to time." Beatrice smiled, satisfied, and then pulled Francis by the hand. "Come see what I drew today." On the table in the activity room was a colorful drawing: a sunny house, flowering trees, a dog in the garden. And in front of the house, many people holding hands: Beatrice, Adrienne, Robert, Francis, Teresa, Dr. Sanchez, and even Tobias the bear, represented as a small, real bear. In the bright blue sky, Beatrice had written in her childish handwriting, "My family." And Francis realized that in the end this was what all her work was about, ensuring that children like Beatrice could draw colorful futures where the word family meant protection, love, and belonging, not fear and isolation. When the day came for Beatrice to leave the shelter, a small ceremony was organized. Everyone who had been important in her journey was there to say goodbye and celebrate her new beginning. Beatrice, dressed in a cheerful yellow dress she had chosen herself, hugged everyone with enthusiasm. "Thank you for finding the key, Francis," she said, when it was her turn to say goodbye. "The key that opened the door to the dark room." "You were the one who showed me where to look," Francis replied, moved. "You are a very brave girl, Beatrice. Never forget that." As she watched Adrienne's car drive away, taking Beatrice to her new life, Francis reflected on the many metaphorical keys that had been necessary to solve this case. The key of keen observation, which led her to question what others had ignored. The key of persistence, which kept her going even when it seemed impossible to prove her suspicions. The key of empathy, which allowed Beatrice to trust her. And perhaps the most important, the key of hope, the belief that even in the darkest situations, there is always a path to the light. The next day, Upon returning to her DCF office, Frances found a new pile of cases awaiting her attention. Different stories, but with common elements. Children in vulnerable situations, dysfunctional families, imperfect protection systems. The reality of social work in the United States, with its monumental challenges and its small, precious victories. She picked up the first file from the pile and began to read, already feeling that familiar mix of indignation and determination that drove her. There were more doors to open, more dark rooms to illuminate, more children waiting for someone to notice their silent cries for help. The case of Beatrice Monroe was over, but the mission continued, and Frances Riley was more prepared than ever to fulfill it. 2 years had passed since Beatrice left St. Jude's shelter to start her new life. Miami remained the same, with its contrast between natural beauty and social inequalities, but much had changed for the protagonists of that story that had moved the city. On a sunny Saturday morning, Frances Riley drove her small Fiat down a main thoroughfare in Kendall. She parked in front of a middle-class residential building, not luxurious like the old mansion on Star Island, nor too simple. A fitting place for new beginnings. Carrying a colorful package, she went up to the 5th floor. Before she could even ring the bell, the door opened, revealing a Beatrice very different from the silent, frightened girl of 2 years ago. "Frances, you came!" exclaimed the now 8-year-old girl, with a radiant smile and longer hair, tied in an elaborate braid. "I promised, didn't I?" Frances replied, being pulled by the hand into the cozy apartment. I wouldn't miss your birthday for anything in the world." The living room was decorated with colorful balloons. A banner read, "Happy 8th birthday, Beatrice," in vibrant letters. Through the open window came a fresh breeze and the distant sound of Miami traffic. Adrienne came from the kitchen, drying her hands on an apron. She looked younger and more relaxed, her hair now its natural color, without the highlights she used to have. Her smile was genuine as she hugged Frances. "So glad you could make it. Beatrice has been talking about it all week." "I brought something for the birthday girl," Frances said, handing the package to Beatrice, who opened it immediately, revealing an amateur telescope. "Wow, now I can see the real stars," the girl exclaimed, her eyes shining with excitement. Her newfound passion for astronomy had begun a few months earlier during a science class. "And how's the new job?" Frances asked Adrienne, while Beatrice ran to show the gift to her inseparable companion Tobias, the teddy bear who now held a place of honor on her bed. "It's going well," Adrienne replied, leading her to the balcony where they could talk better. "The publishing house is a much healthier environment than the corporate world I knew. I work with what I've always loved, books, and I still have flexible hours to be with Beatrice." After returning to the US and recovering her legal identity, Adrienne had decided not to go back to the business world. Instead, she used her talent for languages and started working as a translator at a children's book publisher, a choice that reflected her priority of rebuilding the bond with her daughter. "And Robert? Is he coming to the party?" Frances asked. "Yes, he should be here soon with Claire," Adrienne replied, referring to Robert's new wife, a psychologist he had met during the court-recommended family therapy sessions. "Things are surprisingly good between us. It took time, a lot of therapy, and a few heated discussions, but we've reached a point of balance." The Monroe case had left deep marks on everyone involved, but it had also catalyzed significant transformations. Robert, after facing the legal consequences of his negligence, had sold off a large part of his companies, opting for a life less focused on accumulating wealth and more on rebuilding his relationship with Beatrice. His weekend visits were now moments of genuine connection, not just superficially fulfilled obligations. As for Deborah, or Lucy Smith, her real name, she was serving her sentence in a closed-regime prison, while her brother Henry was facing multiple charges after being extradited. The illicitly accumulated fortune from the siblings' scheme had been largely confiscated, with a portion allocated to a fund for victims of domestic violence by judicial order. The doorbell rang, announcing the arrival of the first guests, Teresa, the CPS officer, and Dr. Sanchez, the psychologist who continued to see Beatrice, now in monthly sessions. "Aunt Teresa, Aunt Camilla." Beatrice ran to hug them, showing the same spontaneous joy with which she now faced life. More guests arrived, classmates from Beatrice's new school, neighbors from the building, Adrienne's co-workers, the house filled with laughter and lively conversation, a stark contrast to the oppressive silence that had reigned in the old mansion. Frances watched it all with a sense of professional and personal fulfillment. As a social worker, she knew that not all cases had such positive outcomes. Many children remained in vulnerable situations, many families never reconciled, many stories ended without resolution. But here, in this ordinary living room in a Kendall apartment, was living proof that the work mattered, that the right intervention at the right time could change life trajectories. "What are you thinking about?" asked Marianne, the lawyer, who had just arrived and joined Frances by the window. "About how different things could have been," Frances replied. "If I hadn't noticed that cry that day, if I hadn't followed my intuition—" "But you did," Marianne interrupted gently. "That's what makes you an excellent professional. You see what others don't." At that moment, Robert arrived with Claire. The integration between Beatrice's different family units, something that had seemed impossible 2 years earlier, now happened with surprising naturalness. The love for the girl had proven stronger than past resentments. When it was time to sing Happy Birthday, Beatrice was positioned behind the cake decorated with stars and planets. Looking at the faces around her, mother, father, stepmother, the social worker who had saved her, the professionals who supported her, her new friends, she smiled with a confidence that only children who feel truly safe and loved can express. "Make a wish, sweetie," Adrienne encouraged. As the candles flickered, Beatrice closed her eyes for a moment, concentrating intensely, before blowing out all the candles in one go to enthusiastic applause. Later, as the party began to wind down and the Miami sky was tinged with the colors of dusk, Beatrice pulled Frances into her room, wanting to show her something. It was a new drawing, framed and hung on the wall, a colorful depiction of all the important people in her life, united under a starry sky. "Can't you know what my wish was?" Beatrice asked, looking seriously at Frances. "We can't tell birthday wishes," Frances reminded her with a smile, "or they don't come true." "But this one already has," Beatrice insisted. "I wished that all the children who are in dark rooms can find someone like you, who has the right key." Frances felt her eyes well up. In her daily work at the DCF, she continued to face difficult cases, bureaucratic battles, flawed systems. But at that moment, under the gaze of this child who had re-emerged from the shadows with extraordinary strength, all the difficulties seemed worthwhile. "You know what, Beatrice? That's my wish too," she replied, hugging the girl. "Every single day." As she drove home that night, Frances looked up at the Miami sky, where the first stars were beginning to appear between scattered clouds. Somewhere in the city, she knew, there were other children waiting for help, other keys to be found, other doors to be opened. Tomorrow she would resume her work with renewed energy, because if Beatrice had found her way to the light, other children could find theirs too. And for that to happen, all it took was for someone to care enough to hear the muffled cry behind the walls of silence.